Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Glad you're here. Happy Thursday, best day of the week. Hey, real quick before we get started, we have a new app for the first, and everything's right there. It's in the App Store. It's absolutely free, of course. The clips, whole shows, live, favorites, everything right there. It's awesome. Totally free. Download it. Just search for The First TV in the App Store, and it's all yours. This is a very bad decision, if I may. In case you've never been here before, maybe it's the first time you've ever watched the show. In short, I've been for the shutdown. I agree with Nassim Taleb. There is no economy if you let this virus just run through the nation like we thought it would have in March 10th. Like, at the very least, we knew nothing about this virus on March 10th or whatever this all started. We didn't know how fast it spread, how far, how serious, who it affects, etc. We had to make that decision at the time based on what we knew then. Now, as little as we know now still about the virus, how it affects different people in different ways and all these different, there's so many unknowns still, we still know enough on April 30th that I believe it's now time to start letting people go to work or go to the store or eat out if they want. I mean, you have to drag people out of their house and force them to go to a restaurant, but if someone wants to go, and I think it's gonna be a pretty small percentage of people would, but that's fine, let them go. I think now's the time. But I wanted to say that I've been for the shutdown this whole time. It's not like I've been against it the whole time and I'm like, no, I'm for it then, but now it's time we start transitioning out. Is that fair? Because the goal of the shutdown was never to stop the virus. That's impossible, you can't do that. It was to prevent everyone from getting it at the same time and overwhelming the healthcare system. We all know that. In California, at least, I live in San Diego. In California, that goal has been achieved. That's great. Congratulations. We should celebrate that. That's fantastic news that we are well under that healthcare capacity line. But we got to move forward. And we can't stay where we are based off of March 10th fears. We need to start moving forward a little bit based off of April 30th's knowledge. I promise you, California especially, but I'm sure this is true everywhere. If the governor let people go for about a week or two, only 2.5% of people will go places. This ties into what we talked about yesterday or 2 days ago about the innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and the laggards. I'm not going to do it again, but if you heard yesterday, you know what I'm talking about. 2.5% of people will go places for the next week or two. Give it a couple weeks, and then 13.5% of people will start to venture out. Give it a month or two, and about another 34% of people will see how that went and then decide what they want to do. It'll be another 6 months before another 34% of people want to go out. And then at the end, about 16% of people probably won't go anywhere for a very long time unless it's absolutely necessary because they're probably at most severe risk. But that's fine. That's a bell curve, and it's appropriate. That's how it should be done. And I think people will do that naturally on their own, and people will take the proper precautions. It's time to do that. There's been a lot of goodwill throughout these last 2 months for our politicians, a lot of grace. But governors, mayors, if you get petty and crack down hard on that 2% of people who want to go to the beach, for instance, then you will lose a lot of goodwill from another maybe, let's say, 30% of people who are on the fence about this whole thing, but they've been taking your word for it this whole time, and they still are. But if you get petty, they're going to start working against you, and then it's not going to work. Right? It's not worth going after the 2% and losing the 30% or possibly even more. The mayor of LA, it was a while back, to be a little fair, but he said, I'm going to go after the 0.1%. You have 99.9% compliance. Don't be a jerk and go after the 0.1%. What good is that? Especially if you're going to then alienate a much larger percentage. So anyway, I say all this, sorry, I kind of got off point. I say all this because there was a bulletin that was sent out by the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, to all the police departments across the state, warning them that today he will declare that all the beaches in California have to be closed. So up until now, for the last week or so, I should say, it's been up to the local counties and in particular the local cities. So San Diego County, the county said we're going to shut down the parking lots around the beaches. So really only locals and people who can bike can go to the beach. And then every city in San Diego has decided whether or not they're going to allow people to walk up and down the beach. I think that's been an okay thing, right? Orange County in particular opened up the other day, and a lot of people, well, it looked like a lot of people went to the beach. Not that many, actually. We're going to get to that in just a second, but it looked like a lot of people went to the beach. But that's okay. That's the 2%. I mean, even if a lot of people did go to the beach, it's still 2%. It's not 1 million people didn't go to the beach. It was like 1,000 people went to the beach. That's the 2%. Let them go. Don't waste your goodwill, Governor. It's the kind of stuff that gets people ticked off and start acting against your orders just to be spiteful back to your spite. Maybe someone was wanting to go to the beach, but they're like, the governor, we're still I'm just going to kind of wait. And now they're like, Newsom says I can't, I'm going. Not worth it. Okay, on this point about it looked like a lot of people were at the beach. You got to be very careful with pictures you see of packed beaches, among other things. They can be very deceiving. We shared an example a week or so ago, a picture of people at a beach. I think it was in Jacksonville, Florida, or somewhere in Florida. And the picture from the ground, it looked packed, right? They used a certain camera lens from a certain angle, and the beach looked packed. And then a local reporter showed an aerial shot taken of the same beach at the same time, and it was super, there was almost no one there. It was very sparse, and everyone was spread out, and it was fine. So same time, same beach, and two totally different storylines. I got another example. I've seen a ton of these, but for the sake of time, this is in Denmark. Here's a picture of a busy, crowded street. Look how densely packed everyone is, and you can barely move. And that's as people sitting in Denmark right there. People out and about, spreading the virus, spreading the disease. Here's that same scene from a different angle. Isn't that amazing? In the first image, if you guys are able to go back, it almost looks, if you look at it quick, it looks like people are walking. Because I think the woman on the right, she's walking, so it looks like everyone's kind of walking. You almost, unless you look at it for a long time, you don't even really notice that people are standing in line. Same people, again, from the side, very appropriately distanced. So you could write two totally different articles about what those people in Denmark are doing based off of each of those pictures. It's amazing. Now, I don't know anything about photography to explain this, and I'm sure there's some photographers who are watching this now who can explain this in great detail. I think, do we have two more pictures? I think we have two more. Yeah, put this next one up here if you can, guys, in New York. Two different photo lenses. The one on the left is taken with a wide-angle lens to make things seem further apart. The one on the right is taken with a telephoto lens to compress the perspective and bring things closer together. Same place, two totally different perspectives. Can't trust anything. Here's your last example. This one's pretty trippy. So this is a video of a train. You guys can throw it up here. This train is traveling at the same speed the entire time. Wow, isn't that wild? Same speed, didn't change at all. The speed didn't change. All they did was change the field of vision. And it looks like it's going significantly slower. We say this all the time, assume everything you see is fake at first and or completely out of context. And you gotta do that when you judge how busy beaches are. I wonder how much Gavin Newsom, did Gavin Newsom actually go to a beach and look around and see what people were doing? Or did he see one picture in the LA Times and conclude that the beaches are packed? About out of context, have you seen the picture or the video of the police officers yelling at some woman, I think in Wisconsin, because her daughter went to people's houses or something? I have no idea. So again, I saw that video the other day, and my first thought was, is that even real? Because you always gotta ask yourself that first. In the era of deep fakes, you can never be so sure about any video you see ever. Second, what in the world is the context to that? I have no idea. I don't know what the daughter was doing. I don't know what the mom was doing. No clue what really happened. I'm reserving all judgment until I know anything else about what really happened in that video. If you notice, it started very obviously in the middle of a conversation. So I'm reserving all judgment, but you can't believe anything you see. Yesterday, I'm gonna remember this every single day moving forward. It was right before my radio show started. I read one article about Sweden and how Sweden is in terrible shape. And the people of Sweden are outraged at their leaders because people are dying in Sweden way more than any other developed country, certainly more than any other Scandinavian country. And things are terrible, and Sweden is the model on how not to act during a pandemic. The next article I read, 5 seconds later, was about how Sweden's death rates are super low. The people are so happy. Everyone's going about their lives, and they are the model on how to handle a pandemic for every developed country. I read those back to back. Choose your own adventure. You can read whatever you want to believe. It's super frustrating. I have no idea what's going on in Sweden. Do you have any idea? I can make up a movie in my head about how I think things are going in Sweden, but I have no clue how things are going in Sweden. It just depends whatever article I happen to read at the moment. Well, crap, what is that? How do you know? Anyway, sorry, off topic, back to California. So Newsom said businesses could be open in weeks. And I talk about California, not only because I live here, but it's kind of like a crystal ball for the rest of the country, right? In many ways. So he says weeks. We're still in weeks mode. Weeks. Let me prove here real quick why I think if the governor let people go, I think a small amount of people will actually go places. And that's the thing we need to be doing. Here's my proof for that. Waffle House. Been to a Waffle House? There's no Waffle Houses in California. Super lame. You heard of the Waffle House Index? So FEMA literally uses this as a factor on how not only how serious a storm is going to be, but how well an area will recover based on whether or not the Waffle House stays open or closes. Little fun Waffle House fact for you. Waffle House uses 2% of all the eggs in the country. How about that? There's your Waffle House. 2% of all the eggs. And I got another Waffle House fact. Ooh, do a little tease here. Waffle House is the #1 seller of what food product? Remind me to say it at the end of the segment. What food product is Waffle House the #1 seller of? You'll never guess it. Anyway, so Waffle House never closes, and but they did for the last couple weeks, and they just opened up again in Georgia. And how many people went? That's the question. Were they packed, line out the door? People getting their Waffle House fix, they haven't gotten it for a couple weeks. I mean, actually, they sold waffle mix online when they were closed, and they sold out immediately. So people really wanted their waffles. So they opened up, and listen, I wasn't at every Waffle House in Georgia, but apparently only a few customers in each store went in. They weren't packed. There wasn't a line out the door. I mean, you let Waffle House open in Georgia, and still only a certain small number of people will go, and let everyone else make up their own judgment, because that's what people did. Now, that was not proper to do 2 months ago. That was not appropriate 2 months ago. 2 months ago, I believe we needed to shut down things for a while, let the worst subside, get a handle on what we're dealing with. There's a brand new, unknown virus with a high rate of spread. That can kill you. We don't know what's going on. So 2 months ago, we needed to do what we needed to do. You can't judge 2 months ago's actions based on what we know now. You can only judge 2 months ago's actions based off what we knew 2 months ago, and I think it was the right call. If anything, we should have shut it down earlier, but no one would have made that call. So let's acknowledge that that was right, or we can at least just acknowledge that that was in the past. But what we're dealing with on April 30th is very different than what we were dealing with on March 10th. And I'm concerned that governments are not quick enough to adjust their mandates. They're operating in March 10th mode, and it's not anymore. And don't push it, governors. Don't get petty. Coming up next, I got to take a break. I want to come back and talk about Gavin Newsom's 4-phase plan in greater specifics and how this is no good. The answer, by the way, Waffle House is the #1 seller of T-bone steaks. Did you even know you could get a T-bone steak at Waffle House? It's called T-bone Steakhouse. Got that coming up. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So I want to talk about Gavin Newsom's 4-phase plan for California. And I want to talk about California, not just because I live here, but I used to live in Tennessee. And even in Tennessee, we always would look at California as sort of a crystal ball of craziness that's to come. So I think it's a good place to look at for what may be happening in your state. So 4-phase plan for California, super vague, to say the least. So phase 1 is what we're doing now. Phase 2 is not what I think it would be. It's way less than what I think we should be opening up for. But phase 2 is curbside pickup for retail, manufacturing open, offices only if necessary, everyone else stay at home, telework, whatever. And then additional public spaces would open up, so like some beaches and parks, I guess. That's phase 2, that's it. To get there, this is the problem. To get to phase 2, we need 5 things to happen. ICU trends stable, and surge capacity needs to be met. I think that's fine. We're there in California. We're way, ICU, pretty stable, way, way, way under surge capacity in California. That's great, wonderful news. But there's 3 other things that are way too high of a hurdle to meet, / an impossible hurdle to meet. And that's problematic if this is what we need for phase 2. So first, there's sufficient PPE, personal protection equipment, to meet demand. Testing capacity is sufficient to meet demand. And contact tracing capacity statewide. So let's go through each of those real quick. Personal protection equipment. Maybe we have enough. I mean, the governor spent $1 billion getting masks from China, $1 billion. Maybe we have enough, but for who, Governor? Like, who do you exactly mean? Do we need enough for just frontline workers? Or do we need enough masks for 40 million Californians? So I don't know exactly what you mean by a sufficient amount, but I'll rate that one as maybe possible, depending on exactly what he means. If we need masks for 40 million people, that's a problem. That's a long way to go. Just frontline workers, maybe that's possible. Testing capacity, that's never going to be sufficient. It's really interesting to go back to what we just talked about with Sweden and perception. South Korea, the perception is, mine was at least, that they're way ahead when it comes to testing. They're the model when it comes to testing. They're testing people all the time, nonstop. We got to be more like South Korea. South Korea has done, as of yesterday, 600,000 tests in a country of 51 million. That's 1%. So if the model country is testing 1% of people, what are we even looking for as the numbers that would be necessary in California to move out of phase 1 into phase 2? I don't know, he doesn't say. Also, what kind of test? What's the sensitivity of the test that we're talking about? We talked about test sensitivity yesterday on the show. There's no specifics from the governor, and that's not good. And then finally, contact tracing. That's not going to happen. So PPE maybe could happen, probably could, maybe. What we just talked about is like, nah, probably not. Probably not ever going to happen. The test. And then contact tracing, no, not going to happen. We've talked about it many times before. No way are you going to get more than 30% of Californians, maybe 30% of Californians signing up for a contact tracing app. It's not going to happen. And you need about 75% of people to download it in order for it to work. So that's what's necessary to get to phase 2. And that's statewide as well. Everyone, there's 56 or 58 counties in California, all of them need to be able to meet those demands before we open up, before any other county can open. So you'd have San Diego or LA or Orange County can do that. It doesn't matter because some other county can't, therefore no one can. Crazy, right? So phase 3 is hair salons, gyms, movie theaters, sports without live audiences, churches, and weddings. That's phase 3. So ladies, you're not getting your roots did for a long time now. That's stage 3. And then stage 4 is when therapeutics have been developed, and that's when convention centers and sports and concerts and stuff. So that's way, way, way off. So again, I'm just concerned that jump from phase 1 to phase 2 is way too high. Testing is too high of a bar. Contact tracing, near impossible. And no time frames, that's the problem. No, well, I understand no time frames. I'll give you grace on that. But no actual metrics, no real numbers at all. So how about, Governor, like we would need X number of masks. We need this much PPE for these people, higher priority, lower priority. Here's the ICU beds we have. Here's what I mean by a sufficient amount in order to meet the surge. This is how many tests we're talking about daily. We need this many tests daily. We need this many people to download the app. They don't even pretend to give any numbers at all. So we're nowhere near specific, not even a range. And that's frustrating. So listen, the name of the game for us has been grace the whole time. Grace. To everyone involved, to ourselves, but to everyone else involved too, everyone making decisions, because this is tough. And I think Newsom's done a good job, I really do. I have no complaints about Gavin Newsom. It's tough, tough situation, lots to consider. Schools, for instance. Right? Do we open up schools or not? Epidemiologically, it might be the worst thing to do, but because of CPS and apparently parents don't feed their kids at home and childcare concerns, you gotta weigh all that. And right? There's hard decisions. You gotta weigh a lot of factors, and we still have a lot of unknowns. So I get it, so giving grace. But some numbers would be nice. Some reasonable standards, more than this little document. It says, one of the standards is there's contact tracing capacity statewide. Like that's what are you talking about? What does that mean? You gotta give me something more than that. So again, for me, we're not going anywhere. My wife and I, with kids, we're still staying put for a couple more weeks. But people should be free to now. And our governor, at least, is moving in the opposite direction. Coming up, we're going to talk with a economist from Hillsdale College. We're going to do that next, about the economic factors that we need to consider as we're deciding what to do. And then we're going to talk with someone from the Competitive Enterprise Institute about the supply chains and why we're literally pouring milk down the drain and not giving it to people. So we'll talk about that. All coming up, true story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So in San Diego, our county board has outsourced all decision-making on what to do next to the health department, Wilma Wooten. And she's an epidemiologist, and that's good. But it's a concern when we have epidemiologists making grand conclusions that obviously require a lot of other things to be weighing properly. I don't want epidemiologists making economic decisions. I don't want economists making epidemiological decisions. We need leaders to take in all this information and make the best decision moving forward. So I will admit, I've been spending a lot of time on the science and all this stuff, and I haven't been spending enough time on the economics of it all. And that's why I'm really excited to talk to an associate professor of economics at Hillsdale College. He's the chair of the Econ Business and Accounting Department, Professor Charles Steele. Mr. Steele, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Wonderful. And we have tons to talk about here. So big picture, I don't want to talk about, was it a good idea to shut down or not a good, or was it worth it or not worth it? Not interested in that right now. I just would love your help on, here are the X number of factors that we need to consider in the economic portion of what we decide to do. So we just got a number about unemployment, new unemployment numbers in, like another 3.5 million or something. So we're at like 30 million people unemployed or whatever, for instance.
Sure.
So let's just start there maybe. What are the ramifications of 30 million unemployed Americans?
Well, we can start, we should start with the numbers, but even before that, I just want to say something that kind of came up from your comment. I'm an expert. I'm an expert on economics, and you've been talking to experts, I think, about epidemiology. And it's important to listen to experts because we know a lot. But don't let experts make the decisions. Learn a lot, but the experts should not be the ones making decisions because we each focus on our specialty. And so we're, in a sense, very narrow. I think economics is a pretty good specialty for this because we look at costs and benefits. But even at that, don't take the economist as the decision maker. That's something that the people ought to be doing themselves. That's my
start off.
My little
Max humility. Love that. And I wish every expert would start with that before they give their expertise. So grateful for that. Thank you, sir. So where do you want to start in your expertise?
Let me start out with just a few numbers and say something about this. First of all, there's a great deal of economic harm that is being done by the shutdown. And I want to emphasize that it's done, the harm is coming from the shutdown, not from the virus itself. When we shut down businesses, we actually depress wages, we depress incomes, we run the risk of putting businesses out of, putting them into bankruptcy. Well, just to give you some numbers on this, I've got a few here. I just want to keep my notes handy. But small businesses are a small business in the United States is officially any business that's under 500 employees. So these are pretty big firms oftentimes. Yeah. Now, according to the NBER, and they they give about 50% of the employment. 50% of the jobs come from small businesses. Well, there have been a number of surveys that have been done to look at small businesses and see how they do with this shutdown. And we know, of course, that if you shut down a business for a day because somebody's sick or something, that's not a great loss. Maybe a week because your pipes broke. But you start talking about a month and you run into real problems. Well, the National Bureau of Economic, NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research, a team of economists from there did a survey. 28% of their respondents, small businesses, said they cannot go for a month of shutdown without failure, permanent closure. The number was 53% if the shutdown goes to 4 months. The J.D. Powers did a similar survey, and their respondents, 48% of the businesses were either temporarily or permanently closed. Most of them just temporary. But it comes up to another 16% would be added to that. So it'd be over 50% of small businesses, according to their survey, would be either temporarily or permanently closed. MetLife and the Chamber of Commerce did a survey, and most small firms cannot go more than a month without a cash flow. And then they run out of cash and they go bankrupt. So you can't just turn off the economy and then flip it back on and expect to come on. If you go for a couple of months, it's going to be a real...
Let me jump in and ask why not? Because I think a lot of people think you can just pause and then everything goes back and you just pick up where we left off. So why can't a business do that?
You can pause for a day. You can maybe pause. You can pause for a week, and most places would be okay. You can't go for a month for many places because they have payments to make. Their costs don't stop, but the revenue flow stops. And if you're paying those costs, or you can't pay those costs, you go bankrupt. And you go a couple of months out, and we're talking about major business losses. And just to get this out of the statistical realm for a minute and talk about real people, which these statistics, of course, do talk about real people, but if we talk about what's going on in Hillsdale, for example, I spoke to the mayor of Hillsdale the other day for about a half hour. Honestly, he was almost in tears. He said that what is happening to the business community here, he thinks that he described it as just being a catastrophe. He said, we're losing our businesses. They're not going to be able to come back. Things that people have worked, put their lives into, and once they hit bankruptcy, they've lost everything. All of their capital investment is gone. They can't employ the people once they're told they can open up. They've got no money. They've got they've got so many debts that they're done. And so it's destructive to people.
Can you give us some other factors and maybe second or third order effects of all of this that most people haven't thought of?
Well, of course, there's high unemployment that becomes not temporary. The danger is it would become permanent. And we just had those figures come out this morning from the Department of Labor on unemployment claims. We now have 12% unemployment in this country, according to the unemployment claims. And that's seasonally adjusted, and that's the highest we've ever recorded in this series. The predictions that were made by economists on how bad the unemployment would be were that 12% was the median. That was the National Association of Business Economists suggested 12% was the most likely. Well, we're already beyond that. And their high prediction was 20%. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis predicted a 32% unemployment rate. So there's a secondary effect for you that people won't have jobs to come back to once this ends.
What is the effect of, let's just talk about debt, right? So trillions of dollars of spending here from the government. What happens there?
Well, that's it's something that I've been speaking about with some of my colleagues. Basically, we're adding a lot to the debt. We've got such a huge debt problem in the United States that one of my colleagues says, well, another trillion there and another trillion there. Who's going to notice at this point? That used to be big money and now it's not. But it's a real serious problem for the federal government. But I think the more immediate problem really is this question of how are we going to get the economy restarted? If we have a deep, slow recovery, that's going to be very problematic because you can't get tax revenue. You're going to have an ongoing problem with budget deficits at that point. Let me give you a different...
Go ahead.
Go ahead. A little bit different kind of secondary issue, and that's what's happening to supply chains. That's one of the ones that alarms me the most, because supply chains are really a web. They're very complex, and we have governors, for example, in Michigan, saying, well, we're going to only keep the essential things open, and we can close down the non-essential. But a government planner has no idea of how complex these chains are, and cannot distinguish between what's essential and what's not. That it's been a wrong-headed approach, but as a result, we're now getting bottlenecks in food supplies, for example. In Wisconsin, they've been dumping hundreds of thousands of gallons of milk because they can't get it into the right part of the supply chain. What happened was when the hospitality industry was shut down, restaurants, motels, also when we lost all the other big institutional buyers, so schools and things like this, the dairy cooperatives who have contracts with them and are set up for that large-scale distribution couldn't shift for regulatory reasons, for failures to be able to get the right kind of packaging and things like that. And, packaging, making plastic, why would that be essential? Well, it turns out that it is. And as a result, they've got milk that they cannot handle. And so they're telling their farmers, we can't handle this stuff, you got to dump it. We're running into the same thing. Now there are supply chain block-ups in hang-ups in meat. And I was just talking to someone yesterday who pointed out that they're now aborting pigs because they won't have any market for the piglets because they've already got too many feeder pigs and then no packing plants. They're afraid of losing packing plants.
Yes, so that'll be down the line. That'll be I don't know how long it takes for a piglet to turn into before you slaughter it, but that'll be a herd, or that'll be felt like a year or two down the road.
Probably less than that.
Even if we opened up now, yeah. I got one last question for you, sir. We only got about a minute or so, but you mentioned government deficits. We're here in we're in California. We already have that huge problem. And I heard the mayor of Nashville yesterday say that they're thinking about a 1 percentage point increase in their property taxes. We have at $750 per property owner average. Do you see massive tax increases coming down the line to pay for all the state deficits because they can't print money?
Sure. I fear that this is coming. I think that this is a real issue. I just trying to work on something this morning about that the solution should not be raising taxes, but I fear that that's what will happen. We've got small businesses being hit by these difficult problems. And the thing to do would be to relax the regulatory environment, which puts a huge burden on the businesses with very little benefit for it. And then maybe to cut taxes. You've got to get the economy up and running. Raising taxes at this point will sound like a good idea to politicians, but it's going to be a harmful thing. We got to get the economy running and producing stuff again. We need production. We need goods and service.
And then we can talk about getting it back up and maybe making up for what's been lost.
We're not going to cure the problem by printing dollars.
Yeah, man. Jeez. Okay, something to weigh. We'll talk with the virologist and we'll get his opinion and we'll do the best we can now moving forward. Professor Steele from Hillsdale College. Thanks, Professor. Appreciate you.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Have a great day. Coming up next, we're going to talk to someone about the supply chain and with food specifically. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I'm so fascinated by and disturbed in ways by this concept. We've talked about it a lot, but I heard this term, too big to pivot, when it comes to our supply chains and particularly our food supply chains. I mean, you've seen the images we've showed the images of million pounds of onions. And the farmer digs this giant ditch and dumps all the onions in the ditch to go back. And you also see lines at the food banks, people looking for food. It's like, whoa, what is this disconnect? And we built these supply lines that are ruthlessly efficient, but there's a trade-off there. And we're feeling that, we're seeing that. It's such a fascinating phenomenon. So I want to go into more detail with this with Greg CONKO. He's a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Mr. CONKO, how are you, sir?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on today, Mike.
So and I'm sure you are too. I mean, you used to be a George Mason, or still are. So you and I are free marketeers, right? We are all about it. We can talk about our bona fides all day long. But it seems to be an interesting trade-off and something I haven't considered before. Not only global supply lines, but some weaknesses, some vulnerabilities in our American supply lines. So maybe you can just speak to that for a second, particularly when it comes to food.
Sure. The first thing to point out is, you see news article after news article about food shortages in the United States. And the fact is, there is no shortage of food. As you talk about, farmers are dumping milk. They're plowing onions and potatoes under, right? So there's plenty of food. What we have is a distribution problem. And as you say, the supply chain is set up to distribute food in a particular way. Mostly this is due to market demands, right? What customers actually want and how they eat food, right? We eat food differently in restaurants than we do when we eat at home. And packaging is different. Part of that has to do with packaging for customers. Part of it is a regulatory problem. It's not mostly a regulatory problem. I don't want to be accused of hyping that part of the issue. But there are regulatory issues that determine how products need to be packaged when they're sold to consumers, right? That are different when you sell to a restaurant kitchen or a school cafeteria. And all these things play into how we go about distributing food and why it's been difficult. We are making changes, right? The USDA and Food and Drug Administration have waived some of the food labeling requirements so that restaurants, for example, that have a backstock of food can repackage it with minimal labeling as long as they're labeling it truthfully, but it doesn't have to have that nutrition panel on the back like you'd see in a grocery store, and sell that to consumers, right? So little by little, we are making strides to change the way and pivot, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah, interesting. I remember we talked the other day about Panera. So Panera Bread is selling groceries. You can buy avocado and fruit and yogurt and milk. But I called them up and I said, hey, are you guys selling flour? And they said, no, but that would make a ton of sense, right? They're selling bread, but I just want 2 pounds of flour. But maybe it's a packaging issue. Maybe there was like legally they're not allowed to sell a bag of flour because it doesn't have a label on it or something like that. I don't know why, but
yeah, well, it's not that.
I mean,
it is a packaging issue, but it's a practicality, right? When Panera buys flour, it buys flour in 50-pound bags, and it needs to, no consumer wants to buy a 50-pound bag of flour. So for Panera to sell that, it would need to break up the package and have new bags to put the flour into, right? I mean, this isn't something, Panera doesn't just have a store of these bags. It has to go out and find a supplier for those things in order to be able to do something like that. And that's why, right, if this goes on for 4, 5, 6 more months, your Paneras of the world may be able to do things like that, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Can we talk a little more about the maybe like meat markets, right? Because that's a little different scenario, or well, maybe not, but you have the slaughterhouses are closing down because not enough people. So why are farmers, I've read about like farmers just euthanizing pigs and cows. Why would that be a thing? I don't get that.
Yeah, well, again, a lot of this has to do with how consumers like to eat their food, right? Pigs in particular, right? Grocery stores and consumers expect hams to be a particular size, right? But a pig doesn't stop growing just because there's a pandemic on, right? So if the pig gets too big, it's now you can still eat the food, but frankly, consumers just don't want it. Again, this goes on for 6 more months, and consumers are going to start being a little less picky, right? The people who will only eat chicken breasts are going to start eating chicken thighs, which is better anyway. People who want sirloin steak are going to start eating rump roast, right? So we're going to see changes in consumer behavior once this really hits home. It just hasn't hit home for most people yet, because grocery stores, you'll see spot shortages in a grocery store here or a grocery store there. But I was in the Safeway in my neighborhood just over the weekend, and pork has been the meat that is arguably most significantly hit, but nice selection of boneless pork chops at only slightly higher prices than I would have found them 3 months ago.
Yeah, price is another aspect here. This is funny you bring this up, because now I remember I read something about someone was talking about the siloing of all of it, I guess. And he made some point about how growers, there'll be farmers who grow lettuce to the exact specification of a single restaurant chain. So like McDonald's says, we want the lettuce to be this color and the tomatoes to be this size because it has to fit our hamburger bun. You're right, so we're so picky, almost too pricey. So maybe big picture, like free market wise, it's good that it's like so efficient that we're able to raise a pig to be exactly the size for our precise specifications. Yeah. But there is a trade-off. So how moving forward do we find that right balance?
Well, let me start by saying a lot of this is driven by what consumers want, right? So the only way to change all of this would be to have restaurant chains or grocery stores or farmers or the government dictate to consumers, well, you may want a ham that is always this size, but we're not going to give that to you, right? I would much rather live in an environment where consumers drive what's available in the marketplace than government, right? For starters, it's more efficient. And it gets consumers what they want more often than the alternative, right? And to be honest, right, we're not seeing the kind of critical, dire projections of food shortages, even in supermarkets that people are talking about, right? I will say that the people who are talking about the crisis in the food industry now are people in the food industry, not consumers, right? The people in the food industry who are looking for handouts, they're looking for protection, right? The meat packing industry lobbied the president to invoke the Defense Production Act to declare meat slaughterhouses critical infrastructure.
Yeah. So why would
they could, because slaughterhouse workers are concerned about working in close proximity to colleagues and exposing themselves to the coronavirus, right? And they're demanding either closing down slaughterhouses or having the slaughterhouse owners slow production down, spreading workers farther apart. When the slaughterhouses go to the president and get a declaration that slaughterhouses are critical infrastructure, now all of a sudden they're protected against demands to shut down. Right, so there's a lot of gamesmanship going on here in what we're hearing in the news. So the markets actually have responded reasonably well, which is not to say that they've responded perfectly, but we've seen time and time again throughout history that markets respond to crises like these better than governments do.
That's for sure, no doubt about that. I'm curious moving forward if a system could be set up, not by the government, but if we, the people, could set up a system that could better maneuver in a time like this. But then is that really worth it? Because these pandemics don't roll around every 2 years, right? It's like a once every 100-year, 50-year kind of thing. So is it even really worth the lack of efficiency normally for something like this? Wow, that's amazing. Okay, I'll end with this, Greg. What do you think would have to happen moving forward? Like what major break in the supply chain, or if the pandemic goes on for a certain amount of time or whatever, what's sort of your hunch on when it would be a problem, food shortages in grocery stores? What would you have to see for you to be like, oh yeah, actually this could be bad?
I think, earlier I said I didn't want to blame government regulation for some of the problems that we're seeing, and I don't, but only because the regulators, at least for the last couple of weeks, have been willing to suspend this rule or waive that rule, right? So we have seen some willingness to be flexible from the federal regulators. If they stop being flexible, if they stop allowing the market to figure out an alternative way, that I think is what could really lead to some substantial shortages. Or to be honest, if the coronavirus is, if the infection rate, if the fatality rate is in fact much worse than we think it is currently, right? Today, we have reason to believe that it is a lot less bad than we thought a month ago. But if we're wrong now and we were right then, and this goes on for many more months, right? It could be a serious problem just because of the disease is a problem. Not because there's anything wrong with the supply chain per se.
Yeah, and you're so right about the regulation. I totally see, we're trying to pivot, we're figuring it out, farmers are being flexible, whatever, but then the government comes in and says, oh, you have to do this, and it makes no sense at all, and then the whole thing crumbles from there. I could totally see that. I'm so glad you said that. Greg, I hate we gotta go. Greg CONKO, Competitive Enterprise Institute Senior Fellow. I hope we can do it again, Greg. Thank you for your insight.
Thank you.
Hey, Slater Crusaders, friendly reminder to download our new app on the App Store, iPhone, Android. It's awesome. It's all right there. All the videos, full show. You can watch live. It's awesome. The app, just look for The First TV and you can download it there. We got our special tomorrow. COVID-19 made in China. We'll see you then. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word.